Hi, I'm Jonah McDonald, and this is Living History. I'm the author of Secret Atlanta, a guide to the weird, wonderful, and obscure. And I love learning about history and finding hidden and unusual places all over our city. Like this statue. This is Dog Knee. And it's a monument in tribute to America's search and rescue dogs. But this isn't what I'm here to show you today. Instead, we are going to find other monuments and museums which can give us a glimpse of Atlanta's history and how our city interprets history. We're going to visit the Georgia State Capitol, an unusual monument about gravity on a college campus. We are going to look at the Millennium Gate Museum and a statue of Tomochichi, as well as visiting a museum with miniature chairs. So it's going to be good. Come on with me on an adventure all around our city looking for monuments and museums. The Georgia State Capitol has always seemed like a place that kind of has two minds, Republicans and Democrats. But the Capitol itself is a place that demonstrates and presents history, both inside where there's a history museum and on the Capitol lawn where there are monuments to Georgians from the past. We're not going to go in the museum today, but if we did, we'd actually find a stuffed two-headed calf in there. Instead, we're going to walk around the Capitol grounds and look at the different monuments that have been placed to famous Georgians and see what they tell us about the history of our state. A quick hint, that statue on the top, Miss Freedom, is not what we're mostly going to see as we walk around the Capitol today. So here I am sitting right in front of the Georgia Capitol, and on this nice corner spot there's a statue. But this guy is Joseph E. Brown. He was a slaveholder. He was a secessionist. He was in fact the governor of Georgia when Georgia seceded from the Union, and he was the governor of Georgia during the Civil War. There are statues all over the grounds of the Capitol here honoring these people that were on the honestly wrong side of history. So I started thinking, well, who was on the side of history that was trying to end slavery? Who was on the side of history against secession? And it turns out that when Georgia held a convention to decide whether they were going to secede from the Union, it wasn't just 100% of folks saying, we're going to secede. In fact, it was kind of a coin flip on whether or not Georgia would secede from the Union. But the deeper I dug, what I found was the anti-secessionists were mostly saying, we don't want to secede yet. And there was also a class dynamic within the movement for secession. There were some people in rural areas of the state where there was not as much enslavement that said, secession is only going to help the wealthy landowners who can own a whole lot of enslaved people. So though there wasn't an active anti-slavery movement in the state of Georgia, not everybody agreed with Governor Brown. And just around the corner from Governor Brown is a segregationist governor, one of the worst, Eugene Talmadge, who was particularly vehemently against Jewish people and black people. And then this guy right here, that's Richard B. Russell. Russell was a U.S. Senator for over 40 years, and he was one of the senators that stood against the Civil Rights Movement. He penned the Southern Manifesto along with Senator Strom Thurmond from South Carolina, and yet he was still reelected over and over and over again, and now has a monument on our state capitol. And now we come to maybe the worst of the worst when we look through our modern lens. This man, John Brown Gordon, though he shares the name with the famous abolitionist John Brown, he was a slaveholder, a secessionist, a Confederate general, a governor of the state of Georgia, a U.S. senator, and the leader of the KKK in Georgia. And yet, once again, here he is, riding his steed into battle on the lawn of the Georgia State Capitol. Just behind him, however, tucked away in an alcove out here, there's a statue of President and Governor Jimmy Carter. There's one more statue I want to show you. The man behind me doesn't need any introduction. This is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I don't need to tell you his story either. But he is the first African American person to have a monument on the Georgia State Capitol grounds. After all of these secessionists, slaveholding, segregationists, even KKK member governors that we passed as we circled the Capitol, there is one black person featured in the statuary of the Georgia State Capitol. So why? Well, long history of racism in our state, but also these statues are each rooted in the history of their time. Joseph E. Brown and John Brown Gordon's statues were both placed in the early 1900s at the peak of the Lost Cause movement. And people like Eugene Talmadge, his son Herman Talmadge, and Richard B. Russell were all placed in opposition to the civil rights movement. When was Dr. King's statue placed? Just 5 years ago, in 2017. Maybe, as history moves forward, we can all be thinking about what's the history we want to present on our state capitol ground. Here we are on the quad of Emory University in search of another monument with an unusual story. For a long time, there was a monument right here. It's about 5 feet tall, pink marble, and students used to say, "Meet me at the Gravity Monument." The Gravity Monument. Why was it here? And what's the story? Well, here's the beginning. A man from a wealthy family, his name was Roger Babson, witnessed his sister die of drowning. He fixated on the moment and decided that gravity was his #1 enemy. He created the Gravity Research Foundation and dedicated his life to understanding gravity, controlling gravity, and ending the scourge of gravity. If that sounds a little pseudo-scientific to you, it is. So how did a pseudo-scientific Gravity Research Foundation monument come to be on the quad of a major university? Well, that's what we're going to go find out today, because that monument, it isn't here anymore. It's been removed and placed somewhere else. So I am off to find it, and that's where I'll tell you the rest of this story. I know it's around here. I think it's that way. Let's try. Oh yeah, this is it. Aha! I knew it was behind this building. This is the Gravity Monument. All right, so why did it come to Emory's campus? In 1962, there was a disaster. There was over 120 members of Atlanta's philanthropic arts community that went on a chartered flight to Paris to go see art and to think about how they could make Atlanta more of an arts destination as well. On the way home, when the airplane lifted off from Orly, France, the plane crashed and 130 people died. It was international news. I mean, it really was just a huge tragedy for the world anytime there's a plane crash, but particularly for Atlanta. Some say that Dr. King even postponed a planned sit-in because of the tragedy. The famous artist, Andy Warhol, painted a painting about this plane crash. There was one more person who did something as a result of the plane crash. It was Mr. Roger Babson. He heard that a plane had crashed, and Atlantans must hate gravity at this point. So he provided a $5,000 grant for the research of gravity to Emory University and this monument that you see before you today. He figured, I hate gravity. People in Atlanta must hate gravity now too. We should give them a gravity monument. On the monument, it says, "This monument is to remind students of the blessings forthcoming when science determines what gravity is, how it works, and how it may be controlled." I'm hamming it up a little bit, but the reality, the scientific reality, is scientists don't know exactly how gravity works. But there's really no scientific consensus that gravity is a bad thing or that gravity should be controlled. As a result, the monument, even though it was in the middle of Emory's quad, became controversial. Some people on a university campus said, "Why do we have this pseudo-scientific monument in the middle of our campus?" But others, as I've mentioned before, used the monument as kind of a joke and a meeting place for campus activities. And now, it's nestled in these little woods behind the Math and Sciences building. Why? Well, there was so much controversy that finally the university, as they were doing some modifications to their quad, quietly removed the monument, put it in storage, and didn't put it back in place. But there was an uproar on campus. Students began saying, "Where's the gravity monument?" And finally the administration relented, and the monument was put up right here in this small little courtyard. But that's not all. One professor, Professor Robert Rohr, decided that not only did he think that the story of the gravity monument was super interesting, he wanted his Professor Emeritus bench to be put right in front of the gravity monument. And that's where it stands today.